Okay, so we've already gone deep into the most interesting member of the CCRU, which is Nick Land. And we've kind of covered the tangential Yarvin and stuff a little bit. I think it was appropriate to get into the left side of the scene, the left side of accelerationism, the left side of, this post-Deleuzian fun philosophical space, which has kind of taken the world by storm, especially recently. But yeah, so we got into Fisher a little bit. What do you think of Mark Fisher? What are your overall thoughts?
Man, while you were talking about this, all I could think was when you said, it's taken the world by storm, these
Yeah.
critiques and their ideas about world systems.
Yeah.
We're going to get to this later in the episode, but ironically, it feels like, mass culture has absorbed them too.
Yeah.
They have also now become the meme,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
So if you're, say, reading Fisher,
Yeah.
where he's talking about the Live Aid protests in the late 2000s.
Yeah.
And he says that, look, this resembles a corporate event,
Yeah.
right? There's like food being passed around. And
Yeah. You're
and-
storing your protest videos.
yeah, and he's like,
aestheticizing it into a worldview.
this is not an accident.
Buying
right?
anti-XYZ mugs at the protest.
And then and then we're living, or you got your like rainbow lanyard, like it's like it's that level of
I paid
engagement with
$10
reality.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's like, if you're reading these critiques and then your engagement with reality is at the level of this corporatocracy, then you are just like aware or unaware living out the role of the villain in that critique.
Yeah.
Right. And I almost want to say, as we're often self-deprecating and we say that, oh, look, we're doing that right now.
Yeah.
But I actually think that we're not doing that right now.
Yeah.
In the sense that when Fisher or any of these other guys say that they need to, what my takeaway is that reorienting critique towards a more metaphysically radical direction is actually really important, right? And yes, there also is also the idea of radical critique getting absorbed.
Yeah.
But then there's also the narrative reality of once you break the orthodoxy of the cathedral or the vampire's castle or whatever this range of intellectuals have called it, it possibly can set new precedents for new types of discourse. Like he talks about Russell Brand back in the day. Guys catching a lot of heat nowadays or advocating for anything he did. But using the Brand example, that he used the tools, the language, the flair of the ruling class against them.
Yeah.
And to see, in another K-Punk article, he talks about Owen Jones. So realizing that all is not lost, that there is a space in which to have non-integrative critique, in which to have a direction that you can embark on that won't get absorbed by late-stage capitalist hell, is incomplete but hope core.
I mean, I'm not sure if I see, let's say, Russell Brand as like, I haven't read that K-Punk blog of his. I don't know if I see him as a credible, not because of any stuff, but like I don't necessarily see him as existing outside of the system.
I agree with you, actually.
He's a incredibly famous, incredibly successful person who, it's like Ricky Gervais going to the Oscars and like roasting everyone and making the Oscars super viral that year. Everyone's enjoying the celebs getting roasted for. It's pretty much, it feels more in line with what he's describing in Capitalist Realism, as in modernity can integrate its own critique seamlessly
I actually
and
agree with
make a
you.
buck or two on it.
So,
But I don't think a lot of people care that much about the Oscars, but I think everyone enjoyed kind of that entire Ricky Gervais roasting everyone. I don't think many people care, but people enjoy the Will Smith meltdown, for example, So just the fact of the matter is that, it kind of gets commodified.
So I agree with you on that specific example. Even while reading it, I was like, this may not be the best example.
Yeah.
But I think Fisher's argument, just to establish it in principle, right, for the audience's benefit, is to say that someone who is breaking the popular lexicon or moving past it does provide some value in moving towards non-integrative critique and moving towards the possibility of alternative futures, which, we'll flesh this out, but because Fisher is not coming and giving us some grand alternative or some system to say, okay, um,
This
this
is the
is
right
what
political philosophy.
this is
This
right
is the right
political philosophy to
system
have.
follow.
For him, I think what is best philosophically and practically is that which creates more room for different tomorrows. And whether or not we agree with a specific example, and I share your criticism of that specific example, there is value. Like the Owen Jones example he uses is maybe something we'll agree more on, where he talks about that. Look, I
I'm very
went to
familiar
this.
with Owen Jones.
So Owen Jones is this British leftist. He's a politician,
Yeah.
right? I don't know all that much about him, but I searched him up on a basic level after I saw him mentioned in K-Punk. And his reading of the situation there, again, maybe in reality it wasn't like that, right? But his reading, and this is how he couches it philosophically, is that when Owen Jones led this town hall kind of meeting, actual blue-collar workers who'd been disconnected from, like, post-Margaret Thatcher, had never organized a day in their life, actually showed up and imagined alternative futures, right? As in, it wasn't like, NGO Libby situation where a bunch of unrelated zero stakes people show up and like not doing anything.
Post some nice stories.
Yeah, but it was, exactly. It was actually the people in the thick of it coming and advising each other on how to organize in their respective industries. And for Fisher, that does represent a vector in which an alternative future can be imagined. So I found that to be pretty interesting.
I didn't go too deep into that. I mostly read Capitalist Realism, a few supplemental articles here and there for this conversation we're about to have. My main thing with Fisher came down to the fact that I think as a cultural critic, he's fantastic. He can rattle off references like it's no tomorrow. And he, not just in like this, Reddit, oh, I get that reference, but like he actually knows what he's talking about. Like one of my favorite parts of Capitalist Realism is when he describes that, modernity is better at imagining apocalyptic scenarios than it is at imagining a post-capitalist system.
Yeah.
But he gives the example of like A Children of Men, a great movie by the way if you haven't seen it. Even practically when I think of it, I think of like some of the biggest TV shows or movies and stuff in recent history. The Walking Dead was huge. The Last of Us is huge as we currently speak. So this rings kind of true. And why? The question is, why is modernity so good at imagining apocalyptic scenarios rather than a post-capitalist system? It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. He kind of gets deep into it. And I think that in a lot of places, his critique was quite smart. It was quite pertinent. It was quite well-rounded. I didn't like a lot of his solutions towards the end of it, but that's a conversation we'll get into as we go on. But yeah, that's kind of, so I like him as a cultural critic.
Thing,
yeah,
I just want to extend your point even further.
Yeah.
I fully agree. And you see this, so The Last of Us, Mad Max, this mass cultural obsession with post-apocalypse and also
I mean, we've
zombies.
literally done an episode on this.
Yeah.
So
And
everyone's kind of obsessed with the end of the world.
And if you take into account Fisher's analysis of the slow cancellation of the future, couched within the larger idea of ontology, one way you could look at it is the media of the 70s and the 80s was dominated by visions of the future.
Yeah,
that
futuristic.
like
I mean, you have 80s synthwave, you have 70s, like, you have Star Wars came out at that time as well. The original Star Wars was around that time. Star Trek was around that time. Back to the Future. You had Blade Runner. You had all these Blade Runners more on an apocalyptic life. But you still had like, coherent vision of what the future.
And all these
even in the
cartoons with
50s,
like
imagine, think of this, like, even in the 1950s, like one of the biggest like kids TV shows was the Flintstones. They're in the not the Flintstones, the Jetsons.
that's
The
I was
Jetsons.
trying to remember that
The
name.
Jetsons, yeah. So you got the Jetsons, this nuclear family up in the space, and like that's an interesting future. You can't even imagine something
Bro, the
like that.
Jetsons is
I don't know what's
exactly-
more unfeasible today: a space colony or a nuclear family. at least in the West. When you look
No,
at the
bro,
Jetsons.
the Jetsons is exactly the right example. I was actually trying to remember their name
Yeah.
right now. It's the perfect example. That back then, that is what there was this mass psychosis about, right? There was this entire movement and this obsession with what can be in 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
And they had this idea in their head that as of now, we would have these flying cars and we'd have colonized space and all of those things.
Yeah.
And it was this collective aspiration.
Yeah.
Because, if you ask someone that, okay, in the late 60s, you've reached space, or you've reached, and then you've gone to the moon,
Yeah.
right? Then a colony with the giant glass bubble around it, where the Jetsons and Arbaz and Momi live in peace and harmony, and there are no races anymore, and everyone's light brown.
Yeah.
That's going to be that's 30 years away, right? And as we've gone further and further into it, we have hit a kind of I wouldn't even say technological barrier, but it's not a mass aspiration anymore.
Yeah.
As in back in the day, you'd have in the Cold War, the world is split broadly into two camps, and both of them have their hopes riding on,
who's going to get to space first.
Exactly.
And here's the thing, I've actually seen the space race and man landing on the moon described as the last truly Faustian act. Do you get what I mean?
No,
it was the last time, there
exactly,
was no,
I agree with that
there was no
characterization.
practical reason for man in the 60s to want to spend so much. I mean, I think there's some reports that America almost went bankrupt trying to get to space to make a coherent space program.
Bro,
you do it for pure love of the game, the pure Faustian spirit, which wants to understand the world, bring it under its logical domain, control of the universe, that type of Faustian spirit aspects of it. So it feels like that was the time, wasn't there to experience it, but based upon even some of the Fisher stuff, even based upon the space race and all these crazy things happening, that was the time that really felt like, oh, what does the future hold? It was an imaginative time.
And since then,
Yeah.
that mass aspiration,
Yeah.
that will it be the American bloc or the Soviet bloc that will first, surmount the limits
Yeah.
of humanity. You've gone to this privatization and siloization of this ambition,
Yeah.
where it's gone from civilizational endeavors to can
Private
Elon Musk make this happen, or can Jeff Bezos make this happen?
Yeah.
And it has none of the glamour that I imagine it did back in the day.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think about it now, I'm like, yeah, it would be pretty cool to go on you could do in 10 years, you could do a honeymoon around the moon or something.
Yeah.
But it has none of the fervor that the Jetsons would inspire in a young
As
person.
Jean-Francois Lyotard put it, and Fisher even cited, it's the end of all meta-narratives. Back then, you had this meta-narrative that, we could colonize space. Humanity could, expand outwards, upwards and outwards, which doesn't necessarily exist anymore. And then there's one part of, there's one section in Capitalist Realism in which Fisher also describes modernity in as in the 40s, 50s, post-World War era up until the 70s, even 80s. It was characterized by a future-looking vision, whereas postmodernity, as in neoliberalism, is characterized by nostalgia and retrospection. And we can even see this in our art. We can even see this in the pop culture today, where it's and we've also spoken about this in the past, where it's a constant remixing of the past. You see 80s synths come back in late 2020 with The Weeknd and stuff. You have the constant remakes of old movies. We've remade Disney movies from our youth into live action and stuff. This is a constant remixing aspect. It's just nostalgia farming. It's just
and some of the
it's very there's no future orientation towards
some of the analysis that I saw in Capitalist Realism about why this is the case, I found that to be really interesting. Because one thing I'd always thinking about, I was like, okay, there are these mass cultural phenomena because of which you're saying that there is only reproduction and there's no groundbreaking creation.
Yeah.
And I always wondered, how does that look on a day-to-day basis? What has changed about the average person's life?
Yeah.
And when he argues it through, he teaches it like a night school or something. When he argues it through those children, and he talks about the depressive anhedonia and
depressive hedonia.
And then he comes and says that this is a natural function of the fact that if you're what is now all over Huberman Instagram, you know that you're always looking for your next shot of dopamine?
Yeah.
There's a layer of analysis which is literally just that.
Yeah.
Because if you're always distracted, if you're always on your phone, if you're
Yeah.
always overstimulated by a hyper consumption of media,
Yeah.
it will physically not leave you enough time or freed up imaginative space to imagine alternative futures.
Yeah.
So there's on that one level that meta narrative of how the world is functioning right now, but there's also human first, person first, experiential analysis of why are we so bad at producing alternate futures.
Yeah, and just to add some nuance to the idea of depressive hedonia, it's not like he's saying that, humans are not able to experience pleasure anymore. It's more about the fact that we cannot experience anything other than pleasure anymore.
Exactly.
Other than that constant dopamine thing where it's like, I need immediate gratification, I need that immediate rush of sugar to the head.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how, and he doesn't even blame people like in a Jordan Petersonian way where it's like, clean your room, the lobsters are out to get you, whatever he talks about. He says he describes it more in this structural way, which is a consequence of neoliberalist market logic, consumer as citizen logic, where it's like, freedom is defined by the ability to do and get what you want, not to determine your own path. But the idea of popular freedom in the West today is like, I have the freedom to buy this, I have the freedom to want this, I have the freedom to do this, rather than like, a self-deterministic aspect. And he kind of ties that up in that entire neoliberal critique of how, the neoliberal world is kind of rendered us into
And this is where I really like his inclusion of Foucault and Kafka in Capitalist Realism, where, for example, when he uses a school further to describe the state of young people today, he's saying that you've got these school evaluations by these school boards that come in and see how well or how badly the teachers are doing. And then he says that the school board then decides that the evaluations will be less strict and less invasive. But all that does is that, yes, the evaluators come for a shorter amount of time, but that makes the teachers panic even more because they're like, we'll be judged even more harshly. And he comes back to, you've siloed these children into these very arbitrary metrics of success and failure. You've given them these syllabi, you've flattened them, right? You've turned schools into capitalist hell. And there seems to be, again, like, bro, genuinely, I would think about this a couple of years ago. I think I was reading Emile, which is like the penultimate treatise on, raising educated children. And I was like, dude, there's so much more to education than I thought, because before that, when I used to think about it, I'd be like, okay, how are you creating like the Pakistani Merde moment or Ubermensch en masse, right? And I was like, what would an education system like that look like? It was truly hard to imagine. In like a Fisherian sense, I would be like, man, what would that look like? And then as I read more about like, how did like Bolivar receive an education, or what was Alexander the Great's education like? And then I thought more about how technology enables that for the average person maybe 10 years from now. I was like, okay, now I can imagine an alternative to this. But before that, I was like, dude, what does mass education look like if not this? And that's an example of me being stuck in like the capitalist realist matrix, right? Where it's hard to imagine.
I mean, if I imagine it, I would think a lot less exams. I would actually pursue the American education system more than the British. Like less exam culture. Exams shouldn't matter as much. Day in, day out, effort should matter more. There should be more creative license for the kids. Like I don't see why kids shouldn't be able to do dissertations, because dissertation is basically like a paper that you decide the topic of and you go balls deep into for 3 months and come up with your own like version of the truth. Like I don't see why. Like I find the dissertation to be a superior way of actually testing a kid's acumen than an exam. I'm not saying exams don't have value; they do. But just the creative license and the ability to really get deep into an idea, spend time with something rather than just having that immediate gratification thing where it's like, okay, I get done, start the next thing, the patience it requires. So I would kind of see like, I would want to see kids do dissertations.
That'd be really
like imagine a 13, 14-year-old having to write a 10,000 page report.
10,000 word,
10,000 word report on something. that they choose, they would undoubtedly come out of it more likely than not with some newfound passion, the newfound interest. And it's exactly something like that that can spur creative thinking
Yeah.
intuitively.
Interesting. But that's
Yeah.
another thing where it kind of just like sums up the point that the reflexive impotence against mass late stage capitalism has seeped into literally everything,
Yeah.
including education system,
Yeah.
right?
The student as a consumer model.
That, and then the entire the post-Fordism he's talking about, where
Yeah.
it's like, okay, in the Ford era, like you had shortcomings, but it allowed for a more like you could still touch grass.
Yeah.
Like reality still existed in the way of yes, there was a lot of cookie cutterism in like line production,
Yeah.
right? And before that, where you had like master craftsmen and people producing.
Explain Fordism and post-Fordism as Fisher would want to
But to
describe
put it
it.
really simply, think about it this way, for the layman's benefit. Pre Fordist production lines, right? You would have like, karigars, craftsmen, artisans.
Yeah.
If you went and asked for a sofa, you wouldn't be getting one from a big production line from IKEA. You'd be getting one that is from, the individual vision of.
Arbaz the sofa maker.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Ever the famous Arbaz sofa.
Arbaz the sofa maker.
Yeah, and then
Gohar will tell you all about that.
yeah, and when you're
So
going
will you.
when
Okay,
you're going
anyways, yeah.
more Fordist,
Yeah.
right? It introduces and this is a very foundational economics concept about these production lines. I'm fair than able to put it up. You're getting these mass organized sector workers in factories and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then in post-Fordism, you're getting like the administrative service class that just takes over everything. You're getting like the hypercharged Weberian bureaucracy, which
Box ticking culture, as he described
box ticking
it.
culture, auditing. He keeps
He
talking
hates
about
auditing. He hates bureaucracy and he hates
exactly.
auditing.
And what I love though is when he brings in like the Kafka critique and the Foucault critique, is that he's
The
saying
Kafka Stalinism,
market Stalinism.
Market
Yeah.
Stalinism.
And when he brings that in, and the point of that is to say that the Weberian bureaucracy, and the Weberian bureaucracy meaning like even what we have in Pakistan today, which is like you have your performance reports, and then you've got like ticks and evaluations, and you've got all these imperfect metrics to which to judge a person, and this explosion of the administrative state. That's like the post-Fordist culture, and he despises that because again it's in a weird way it's too objective and not objective at all in one go. As it's too objective because it's trying to box you in the weirdest ways.
Yeah.
Right? Which you can't box human beings into. And then he takes it further, where in like, for example, what I really like about it is he's not limiting it to the administrative state itself.
Yeah.
He's saying like market Stalinism, or on an individual level, that you're self-regulating to the point where you're acting like a bureaucrat.
Yeah.
And his point in Capitalist Realism, where he says, okay, we get mad at bureaucrats and we point to them because every time you go to them with an issue, they say that it's not up to me, buddy, it's the regulations.
Yeah.
Right? And they point to a fictional other, which he says doesn't exist anymore, fictional big other which doesn't exist anymore. He says actually this bundle, this convoluted bundle of rules and regulations that's holding me back, otherwise I would have done something for you.
Yeah.
But that's actually how all of us act.
Yeah.
Whether
absolutely.
it's market Stalinist bureaucrats, anyone in the media, like the media guys are like the most cooked with this because they think they're like freedom fighters, but they're literally just working for giant corporations.
Yeah.
If you work for like a, God knows, like a consulting firm, an investment bank, if you're in any kind of finance, you're like, this applies to you, right? So the fact that he points this out, I think it makes the critique a lot more pertinent. It's not like a lazy, I'm anti-state, so I'm going to do this. He talks about how it seeps into everything.
Absolutely. One of the more interesting, and I would say one of the parts that struck with me and something we've also discussed about in the past is like, interpassivity. Interpassivity describing like, the commodification of protest, the commodification of rage. It's like you go to a protest, you post a story, you're like, now, we're gonna dance the fascism away or some stupid
Yeah.
bullshit, and it goes semi-viral. And it's like literally the systems you're rebelling against are literally making money off your very protest through content creation and stuff. Because if there's any like big brother figure today, it's the social media platform, then it's the technological elite. So it's like literally, and this doesn't just go into the protest. It even goes into like the meme game where we think the real schizos are is, hey, through our meme magic, we're going to break the system. But it's like the system is actually like profiting off of it. It's like I'm going onto my social media just so that I can see those dissident memes.
Yeah.
And like they're making money off my screen tab by sending me ads and whatever. So basically the entire aspect
And like, you can imagine how much of, say, the far right or the far left meme game is captured, because if you know that like Epstein created 4chan, how many, like, bro, Pepe is actually a psyop then.
Create 4chan. He created 4chan/Paul, which is like the most, which is where like all the shit really happens.
Yeah.
Where it's like all like you Trump's come up was partly due to /Paul.
4chan, 8chan, all these weird
All
forums.
your like QAnon stuff originates from Paul. Like there's an argument to be made that like the dissident right, actually the alt-right, the dissident right comes a bit later, technically. The alt-right was made on 4chan forums that Epstein kind of engineered. And you also have these entire things of like Peter Thiel made the JD Vance, the rare JD Vance meme, the Gratification meme. So it's like literally.
How much do we have proof for that? What's the scene with that?
I don't know if we have exact proof for it. I've read it in some places. It wouldn't like be surprised if Peter Thiel is running meme farms and it's like he's littering like $100,000 per meme to make it viral and like capture people's attention and loosh farm them. It's like a pretty Thiel thing to do.
Yeah.
But coming back to interpassivity. Interpassivity is basically this exact concept that the system can re-territorialize your rage in a nice way and sell it back to you through Che Guevara t-shirts and like Nirvana Kurt Cobain t-shirts and like dance the fascism away protest.
This is actually, I would say, the part that I felt most strongly about in all of capitalist realism, and this is all under the umbrella of reflexive impotence.
Yeah.
Right. The idea being that for the first time in history, so there's this idea of the big other, right? This set of rules, regulations, norms, think something adjacent to land's human security system.
Yeah.
Right? That is this stabilizing mythology that everyone lives in some sort of reference to. So, for example, if a few hundred years ago, you're not happy with your king's taxation, at least you profess some lip service to the divine right of kings.
Yeah.
And you said that there is a stabilizing force in my kingdom.
Yeah.
Until its breaking point, the vast majority of people at least profess some sort of allegiance to.
Yeah.
So had this idea of how the world is actually organized. They had this idea that someone somewhere is in charge.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's likening it, like comparing it to what the bureaucrat's idea, where he's saying, oh, there's actually this set of rules and regulations.
Yeah.
Where in the world of Land and Negrestani and even Fisher, the rules and regulations have taken on a life of their own. No one knows who they serve anymore.
Yeah.
Right? They've self-proliferated like that outside runaway force.
They're like an occult egregore where it's like they have their own consciousness,
Literally.
they have their own logic,
Literally.
and they just
So right now you're saying,
go and
oh, it's
organize
like
society
there's
the way they
actually
want.
someone is in charge. But back in the day,
Yeah.
there kind of was someone in charge. And you can make the Landian argument that there were outside forces flowing through that, sure. But in Fisher's head, and I agree with this, that there were stabilizing cores. There was the church, or there was
the
divine
state,
right
the
of kings,
party,
anything.
the vanguard, whatever. You had some
was
sort of
something
guy
which-
or thing that would
which
organize
people
society
believed in
its-
enough,
Yeah.
or were on threat of serious physical harm.
Yeah.
They could not profess the fact that they didn't believe in it.
Yeah.
Right? What is the big break in modernity?
The end of all grand meta-narratives, as Jean-Francois Lyotard puts
Yeah,
it.
as you said,
Incredulity
the
of
incredulity of
meta-narratives.
meta-narratives.
Yeah. And Fisher, I think, has a very, very interesting take on this, because he says that, okay, to put into perspective, Lyotard argues that, modernity and post-World War II world, we've realized that all these stories we told each other, these grand stories, these myths of emancipation, of progress and stuff, they're actually bullshit, they're not real. So it's the end of all grand meta-narrative. The last time we had like society ascribing to some sort of grand meta-narrative was the space race that we talked about earlier. That was a grand meta-narrative that had like an existential element to it. Like, we're going to go colonize the space. Man is going to, symbolically touch the heavens in a way, because space is always, as we know with all this cosmology stuff, like space was always this frontier from the time of the ancients where we believe that's where the heavens are.
Like Icarus and Prometheus maxing.
Exactly, yeah. So, I mean, to put into perspective, when we think of like seven heavens, like, the seven heavens of God or something, like the ancients believed that there were seven planets in the sky as well. So space has always had this like, kind of religious angle to it. And
The
when
ultimate aspiration of man.
And so when man and civilization, be it the Soviet Union or the USA, say that we want to go to space, that is a religious mission. That is that has an element of a meta narrative. There's a broader meta narrative going on. So what Fisher says then is that Lyotard says there's the end of all meta narratives. People don't believe in these as societies, as states, as cultures. Maybe on private levels we still believe in stuff, but as a collective we don't really believe in anything anymore. And because of that, whoa, we're free, we can do whatever we want. Lyotard kind of celebrates this a little bit. Fisher says that no, this is not to be celebrated. This is not a good thing, because when all meta-narratives are gone and there's no grand meta-narrative to have some sort of collective social life anymore, that kind of is a meta-narrative in of itself, as in the idea that no meta-narrative at all is a meta-narrative, and that actually creates this vacuum where capitalist realist logic that he describes becomes the default meta-narrative. Like, and we see this in the West, where it's like, what right do you have as people to earn wealth? So that's the capitalist logic, where it's like capitalist or financial logic becomes,
where does this
it becomes
become
this
a more
almost transcendental ideal.
And where does it become a runaway, self-organizing, Landian outside force?
To the stock market, to the financialization.
That is the peak of capitalism, because earlier, the Fisherian worldview being that you imagined a big other, and there was one, because everyone collectively ascribed to it.
Yeah.
And now, there still is a grand narrative, which is
There's
there's
no
the
grand
logic of
narrative.
capital,
Yeah.
but no one is actually in charge.
Yeah.
There's no human security system based individual institution that can actually claim to be in charge.
Yeah.
Right? It has taken on a logic of its own, let's say. And that I find to be a really interesting metaphysical shift in his analysis of
Yeah.
the entire situation.
So what I found really, really interesting is that right after he gets into Lyotard's meta-narrative analysis, he gets into land. And Land and him have their own interesting history. Fisher used to be one of Land's students. They were part of the CCRU together, doing jungle raves and doing 48-hour meth benders and stuff. So they have a special relationship. They ended up on different ends of what accelerationism and basically different ends of the political spectrum in a lot of ways. But Fisher is quite charitable to Land in this one regard when it comes to the analysis of what capitalism really is, where he says that, okay, if all meta-narratives are dead, if there is no transcendent ground for politics or values as Lyotard describes, because, none of it is real and that's apparently a freeing idea according to Lyotard, and if the only intellectually defensible position is that meta-narratives and transcendental truth, divine higher order is this bullshit, Land kind of embraces that for what it is. He doesn't he doesn't like stare into the abyss and flinch. What does that actually mean is that, unlike the liberal Democrats or, the Bill Clinton, Thatcher type, libertarian types who think that, capitalism is this redeemable, benevolent system, Land actually sees it for what it is, where it has an inhuman, unstoppable drive that is not anthropocentric, that has its own logic, and that'll stop at nothing, essentially. So
And he specifically, Land in like the OG CCRU Fag Nomina writings,
yeah,
specifically references the Reagans and the Thatchers of the world and says that these people think that they're streamlining and controlling capital, but capital is controlling them.
Yeah.
Right? And that brings you back to the idea that the autonomy is in the force itself, or the force is autonomous, as opposed to
You're in control of the
I
force,
can-
or you're driving the force in any way.
and if you restrain it,
yeah.
going back to our Landian roots as well, it's a temporary destabilization,
Yeah.
deterritorialization.
It's a local entropy.
It's a short-term entropy
Yeah.
that is then reterritorialized, and capital comes back bigger, better, faster, meaner, more evil.
Yeah.
Right.
And the only people who control it or have any say in it are those people who choose to ride the tiger, as Julius Evola would say. It's like you don't control capitalism. You can get on for the ride like the Americans or the British did in the past. The maritime
And see, if
empires
the
have.
tempo is rising,
Uh-huh.
if the tempo of the force is rising, and Land also goes into how capitalism is technology,
Yeah.
is AI.
Yeah.
And we don't need to get into that right now, but I think it's pretty well established in the field what the line of reasoning is. It's like, imagine you like start slaying this mean bunny in your garden, and then every time you kill it, it comes back like morphed into something else, like a hydra. Every time you cut off like one head, it comes back with two.
Yeah.
And that is what ultimately crescendos into the singularity.
Yeah. Like I like this idea where I think of it like if you had to give like a more heterodox definition of what capitalism is, I like phrasing it as like it is basically the structuralization of psychological desires. As in, what is another form of psychological desires? Addiction. If you are a heroin addict, you need one hit, you need a bigger hit, then you need a bigger hit. Capitalism has its own kind of logic in that sense, where it's like, it's just it's like the socialization of desire. It's like it's ultimately its logic is what people want. And wanting too much has its own destructive mechanism, like we see with addiction, which even something like Fisher kind of alludes to.
Yeah.
The politics of desire.
Yeah.
So capitalism is essentially in a strange, more heterodox reading, you can describe it as basically it's
What
desire.
you're saying is literally the
desire
reflection.
unleashed.
What you're saying is literally the reflection of what Land argues, because Land often describes it as deterritorializing the human security system.
Yeah.
What is human security system? The set of norms that limits desire.
Yes.
So this is exactly, you can bring it together that way.
Yeah. Fisher's perspective is essentially that Land kind of sees this for what it is, what it actually is. It's not benevolent. It's like an addiction. Like the analogy I'm giving, it has its own logic. It's going to ask for a bigger and better hit every time. Your best bet with it is that you ride it when it's profitable for you, and then you pay the price for it later on. Like we see in kind of Britain today, these guys were like, they were riding the tiger of capitalism all throughout the 18th and 19th and first half of the 20th centuries. And today they kind of look like a homeless man, like, like an addict. They're kind of hopeless, It's a more honest position. It's not like the Reaganites and the Thatcherites who are like, no, this is reformable. We can control capital, blah, blah, blah.
Even Fisher, although he's not resigned to the CCRU fang nomina position that Land has, that this is just the way it's going and there's nothing else is possible.
Yeah.
Right? He still has a very charitable handle on how things are operating, which is exactly why he's saying it is basically at this point impossible to imagine alternative futures for the average person.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what leads you to the reflexive impotence side of things.
Yeah.
Which is like Geo News Sohail Waraich needs to be mentioned here, because he always like goes to people and he asks, he goes to some politicians and M&A, he says, Wazir Saab, आप टीवी पे आके मजहब रिलीजन की बातें भी करते हैं और साथ साथ आप ये lavish lifestyle भी जीते हैं. क्या ये खुला तजाद नहीं? Right? Is this not a walking manifest contradiction? Right? And I think there is no better description of reflexive impotence, because it is the idea that after the collapse of the big other, after the collapse of the stabilizing forces of the church or the state or whatever national identity, you are for the first time stable in an environment where nobody believes the bullshit logic of not just the state, but the entire logic of how society is organized. Everyone says the elites are corrupt, they don't want what's good for us. There's a general godlessness and hopelessness when it pertains to politics or let's say the organization of capital in society. Nobody believes it. Nobody believes truly that there is a big other looking out for them. Everyone knows that no one else believes it, and yet everyone continues to act as if there is a consensus and there is somebody in charge. Which is when the Kafka and Foucault critiques come in, where he brings in the bureaucrat and says, the bureaucrat says that, it's actually the rules and regulations.
Yeah.
That there's someone in charge. But today, but people will also comply with that, right? People will continue to live that life. People will continue to go into state and corporate bureaucracy, knowing full well in their hearts that that in charge does not exist anymore.
Yeah.
And you capitulate to it in every step of your life. Going back to, for example, the protest stuff. That's the thing that I feel most passionately about, and I'm going to try and say this without sounding like condescending and like an ass.
Yeah.
Earlier me would have said that most people say who are posting about things closest to their heart online.
Yeah.
Whether it's Afghanistan, Palestine, issues in Pakistan, whatever. I would have said straight up, you're just being performative.
Yeah.
Right? The Fisher reading is a bit more charitable. Right? He ultimately does say that they're performative.
Yeah.
But what this made me think of, and maybe this is my attempt to be charitable, is that the sentiment is genuine. The care you feel is real.
Yeah.
Right? But there are no extra points you get for feeling bad when you see like a child blown up to bits. That's a natural reaction every human being will have.
Yeah.
Your responsibility is not to sit and cry about it, although I believe in the power of prayer and all of those things. Those things are real. I'm not saying they're real. But the narrative war, the spiritual war, orienting yourself in the right direction is where you start. Let me be a bit more clear about this, right? So, for example, when we criticize someone like Mehdi Hassan or Malala, it's not because we have personal beef with them. The burger shop does not run on resentment, never has.
Yeah.
Right? We've been able to joke about this.
We've got some great rants out there. It's easy for someone to look at it and be like, oh, these guys are a bunch of trolls. But yeah, we're not resentful people.
Bro, not at all. I would say Mamdani is a great example of this, right?
Oh, I'm so glad you bring that up. Okay, continue.
We troll Mamdani's support base often.
Yeah.
Because I hate the rock star treatment of politicians.
Yeah.
Right?
It's fucking gay.
Do I personally...
It's like the same thing they did with Trudeau. Remember when Trudeau first came in?
Bro.
Oh, he's a sensitive, handsome...
Soft boy Prime Minister.
Chad Prime Minister. And it turned out he's like the worst thing that ever happened to Canada. It's like people fall for the aesthetics too much. Have you seen this thing like this girl on Twitter and IG, some Indian girl, and she is a socialist socialite.
Yes, I have.
Or something.
I have.
And she's like, I wear designer. I'm like wearing all this like vintage Chanel and like stuff. But I'm still a Mamdani fan. I'm still like, a socialist. And for me, this is kind of the pinnacle of what Fisher is still a bit charitable towards it and think that, okay, it's something that people have in their heart. They actually care about it. Maybe it's true for some people. For me, it's a little bit more nefarious or at least a little bit more nihilistic in the sense that it is the accessorization of ideology. What used to be maybe 100 years ago or 200 years ago that people actually took seriously and deeply as worldviews, now they exist as accessories to add to your social profile.
It's your aesthetic.
It's your aesthetic. It's literally the aestheticization of something that used to be transcendental. Do you get what I mean? Like, we see this a lot of the time, even when we go on IG and you have like this, this subcontinental nationalist type aesthetic without any of the actual metaphysical assumption that made those things possible in the first place, like the artsy brown girl or, I'm really, really in touch with my culture, but I don't profess or believe in any of its,
or the struggling,
truths,
tortured artist.
So, and this girl, and when you bring up Mamdani, and it's like, this is like the poster child for this exact phenomena, where it's like you are charitable, and I think Fisher is as well. I think it's pure nihilism.
So, what I think is that the reaction
Yeah.
is I'm not talking necessarily. So I think there's a gradient here, and I think it becomes more nefarious because if you're public or if this is part of your identity, right? Then yes, there's a reason why that empath on your timeline is always the worst person you know.
Yeah.
Like, just to give you an anecdote, right? I moved to Islamabad, get a new bunch of friends, lovely people. One of them who would always be talking about how, like evictions in Islamabad and all that stuff going on right now, and lots of social justice causes in Pakistan, and things that were in principle, they were fine, they made sense. But it was very loud, it was very condescending, it was very like,
In your
hey,
face.
notice me, I'm the person who does this on your timeline.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that same person and I obviously I was like new in the group. I wasn't gonna go and say that, listen, there's something seriously off-putting about your friend. Like, no real person who cares about things
Yeah.
does it this way, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason, like, the most charitable businessman in Karachi, वो एक हाथ से देते हैं और मतलब, you never find out,
Yeah.
right? There is a correlation there, in my opinion.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
my point being, bro, that person in front of me, a month into me being friends with these people, this little bachi came to sell like flowers or something. During she's knocking on her, window and whatnot. So in front of us, she puts the thing down. She goes like, हाँ जी, आप मुझे 5 गजरे दे दें, some shit like that. She buys them, even gives her a good amount of money. And I'm like, okay, that's quite sweet. After the kid leaves, she turns to us and says, guys, she touched my hand. She touched my hand. I need to go wash my hands right now. And in that moment, I was like, this is why this is not a real human being.
Yeah.
And so when you see that performative activist on your timeline, 100% there's something wrong there.
Yeah.
What I was getting to is that there is a big class of people that will be posting, that will be donating for causes that they care about.
And they care about them.
And they do care about them, right? But over there, why are they getting it wrong? Why are they ultimately in the wrong?
Right.
Because they're not orienting their criticism to the right place. For example, Mehdi Hasan critique. Right?
Yeah.
My issue with Mehdi Hasan is that he misdirects his audience and takes the garb of international law. Any person who is even mildly sentient in today's day and age knows that not only, like, if you're genuinely you're not retarded, right?
It's like peak Banksy fan.
Like,
It's like if you like Mehdi Hasan, you probably like Banksy.
But no, bro, but it's, the ugly part here is that everyone knows international law. Not only does it not work for brown people, Muslims, and everyone who is in the second or third tier across the world, it is the reason that the globalist order is able to inflict crimes upon them.
Yeah.
So when you call to it for help every time, right? When your Democratic Party aligned, which is the party of let me paint the bombs rainbow and drop them all over the Middle East.
Lockheed Martin is pride positive.
So if tomorrow people decided that I'm not going to align myself with the soft criticism, the integrative criticism, the impotent criticism of Warren de Fisher, and instead I'm going to go towards more serious modes of critique, that's an escape hatch into a possible force which then destabilizes the meta-narrative of capital.
Yeah.
Right? That's the first step into the outside.
Yeah.
Or the first opening into letting the outside in.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm getting at.
No, I get what you mean. And I think Fisher also had a few interesting ideas exactly as it relates to this.
Yeah, this is
in
this
the
is
sense
where
of the liberal communism that he describes, which is like,
Exactly.
it's like the Bill Gates and Bonos of the world who, fly their private jets and then they talk to you about like, ecology and stuff. It's like never is the question like, hey, is our capitalist system maybe perpetrating all of this stuff? It's never a question as, is the system broken? It's like the system has a problem and we're going to fix it by adding more of the system. The market is bad. We're going to fix it by adding more market. You know what I mean?
And the problem there is, on one level, yes, these guys are living this out hypocritically.
Yeah.
Right. And then they'll even come and not just they'll talk about ecology, and then they'll talk about redistribution.
Yeah.
Right. They'll be like, yes, I've given like $100 billion of my fortune to foundation. It's going to invest in all of these noble ends.
Yeah.
The thing that Fisher keeps bringing us back to, which I think is really important, is these are not reforms in the system at all. These are the reasons
The
that
system can continue because
to exist.
Yeah.
These are the reason systems continue to exist. So
These are the holes.
if you look at like a corporate event where you're like, I was talking about like the environment, or like, and like, you know, this is like falling for DEI in like Morgan Stanley. Right?
Yeah, it's like ESG investing, carbon credits. It's like impact investing. It's like, what about if you get to the root of the actual problem?
Exactly, and it's not. So it's not. It's not
trying to make money off the problem. It's like, you know what? We're going to fix this problem by making money on the problem by giving higher market valuations through BlackRock for ESG compliant companies. And turns out the most ESG compliant company is Saudi Aramco.
Yeah. And bro, the lazy analysis here is this is every armchair leftist and institutional lib, right? They'll come at you with, and this is like a lot of the support from Anhedonia is couched in this way as well, right? Where it's like, well, at least they're doing something, right? Fisher's logic, and I think this is the logic of any metaphysical radical on the right or the left, is that this is not a reform or even a half measure, right?
This actually bolsters the system.
This is sand in your face. This is
controlled
exactly
opposition.
What allows the system to exist and expand.
Because you can psychologically take out that, frustration by professing love and support for these type of figures. And you can buy the ethical product, and you can be like a good Samaritan, and because you're doing that now cognitively, you're like, I don't have any cognitive dissonance anymore. The system can continue going on. These are like it's controlled opposition. It's market-oriented solutions.
There's an exact reference what you're saying where Fisher says that. I think he's referencing to benefit concerts or some like ESG coded like institutional lib form of protest, and saying this performs your activism for you.
Yeah.
The same way, and this is why, like, we never go in on beef. Like, if someone comes at us for like a video, we never recount it.
Yeah.
But this is a moral position, which is why I keep bringing back the Mehdi thing.
Yeah.
Right? Where I'm like, dude, the entire issue that I have there is that for the middling, scared, institutional lib, Mehdi is the person who is performing their political personality for them, right? Ask anyone who is on the cutting edge of actual revolution. Ask everybody. I can give you so many names, right?
Yeah.
From Palestine to Iran to the South Americans who come out and say, what does Norman Finkelstein say? Norman Finkelstein goes as far as to call him a sewer rat, right? And dude, I couldn't care less about presenting like a personal affront to Mehdi Hasan. He's not relevant to me, right? But he is the representation. He is the archetype that performs the resistance for those people, especially in the diaspora, that both want to be on the inside and on the outside. Like, people were talking to us about, listen, it's really risky to do so. I'm like, brother, he's left Al Jazeera. He has an independent platform. People with a 1% of the funding that he has, but also hundreds of thousands of followers. Bro, in the far right, in the far left, bro, from the George Galloways to the Dawa bros, everybody is taking a harsher stance on the issue, right? On the core issues.
Shout out Dawa bros. And it's not all BBCDs, but always a BBCD, I realize.
It is what it is, bro.
They don't like me, by the way.
And the thing is, credits to them. Yeah. The internal ecosystem of rebelling is also present there.
Yeah, right? The Dawa bros.
Yeah, those guys are there.
Yeah,
and bro, even all the leftists.
Yeah.
Right? Bro, take any leftist, true blue leftist position around the world, whether it's South American, whether they're these like Spanish leftists, or these like hardcore guys. But these number in the hundreds of millions cumulatively, all of them have a more third world liberationist stance on all of the colonial projects in the world happening right now, as compared to Mehdi Hasan because he's a Democratic Party operative.
Yeah,
Right.
essentially.
So, and the thing is, like, if you don't know these things, if you don't know what actual revolutionaries have been saying about him, like, who is a better friend of the revolution? The people literally doing the revolution and telling you this guy's scamming you, right? You don't have to listen to it because we told you,
Yeah.
right? Fine. Forget the fact that we're making a completely logically sound argument because you don't like it because you're like 2 years old and you want to go participate in like KPMG's fundraiser for how to like, grow like 2,000 trees in Thatta.
How to be
right?
less racist.
Yeah.
How to be
literally.
not racist to your co-workers.
Bro, it's like, if you can, don't listen to us. Go look at what revolutionaries, actual revolutionaries, who are actually on the cutting edge. So we don't claim to be that,
No.
right? We're not those people.
Yeah.
But at the very least, we can have a metaphysical reorientation where we say that when we voice dissent, we voice it in the right direction. We don't call out to international law, right? We're not saying adopt any kind of extremism, but adopt a newness, adopt a novel approach, right? Either go full on the third world liberationism thing and you rear your head to the empire and you say that no, we're going to put up a viable alternative rather than trying to tod maror ke take your
Reform,
tools.
yeah.
And it's like, again, we say this so much. It's like, okay, where does your theory of resistance come out of? MIT. Oh, MIT, like the place which like, has like $1 billion deal with like Northrop Grumman or something, or some arms manufacturer. It's like, dude, you're not living in the real world.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is a 2-minute conversation. With Mehdi, like, when you ask Mehdi, like, you can cut this out later if you want. You ask Mehdi, what does from the river to the sea mean? Mehdi says, oh yeah, this has always meant that everyone is just going to live in peace and harmony from the river to the sea. And I'm like, brother, that's like, at least be honest about what the thing is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? But yeah, bro, it's kind of crazy. So with this incredibly challenging landscape that Fisher's portrayed, where the biggest obstacle is the inability to imagine another future.
Yeah.
What are we doing? How are we, like, where do we find the escape hatch? How do we get out of this fortress of capital?
So basically, Fisher kind of thinks that there's like a few different elements that we need to reinstate into collective life, collective social life, in order to break out of this vicious cycle of capitalist realism. Delayed gratification is one of them. Social obligation.
As in, delayed gratification needs to be brought back.
Delayed gratification needs to be brought back. We need to learn how to, not be, addicts to depressive hedonia, as you describe it. We should be able to think beyond the pleasure principle.
Where say your phone is a great example. Anyone watching this like video right now, like, this is a...
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the things he wants brought back. He wants there to be some sort of social obligation that we have towards each other, something that will make us stick to a commitment even when times are difficult, when times are not so convenient. Break the market logic of pleasure principle now, next stock earnings report, next the current thing. He kind of wants us to break out of this. And he kind of wants us to, he wants us to be based, essentially. This is kind of the, and basically his solution to this entire thing, though, is he describes it to be the Marxist Supernanny. A pretty loaded term. It's got a bunch of different insinuations there, but this is his genius solution.
Man, what I find really interesting is, yes, he is unable to provide us, like, even with the Marxist Supernanny, he doesn't go into the greatest amount of detail.
Yeah.
But the ability to start breaking us out of the capitalism forever framework, let's call it.
Yeah.
That is a big break from the CCRU origins, because he's discussing the possibility of getting past it. Right?
Yeah.
It's not all doom and gloom. And two, what I note about it is, but it's a transcendental, non-transcendental solution.
Yeah, so basically he kind of wants a secular divine order. He wants a secular higher order, and he says that the Marxist Supernanny can achieve it. And this is why, coming earlier, I was saying I really like him as a cultural critic. I don't necessarily love him as a philosopher. So what he describes essentially is that we need a society in which we have paternalism without the father. Okay? So, but what does paternalism without the father mean? So he calls on the Lacanian idea of the father, but the father is not necessarily like the social fathers like Papa and stuff. It's kind of like the no-saying ability in society. The ability to set boundaries, limits, structure desire in a way. The only way you can have desire in the first place if you have some sort of force of inertia on the other side that says no, you cannot have this, or there's rules, or there's a structure, the structuring of desire. So he wants
And
there to
does
be a
this father
yeah.
include so is it always some sort of dialectic between the citizen and the state where they're in dialogue with the father and they're being told and they're negotiating what's right and wrong? Or is there also an element of you recognize me as a father and therefore you will do my
See,
bidding?
he's very, very unclear about this because he wants the dad function, the symbolic dad function. He wants the archetypal dad function. He wants the social dad function.
Explain these a bit just for the audience, just
Okay,
for a bit of clarity.
so the symbolic function of the father is a no-sayer, is the person, or is the superstructure, or the metaphysical framework that provides limits, provides structures. The occultists would call it Saturn. The ancients would call it, whatever. Foucault talks about this in the sense that, these are like, the punishment. It's the big other that says that, we're going to punish you. It's basically the law.
It's a norm-setting function.
It's a norm-setting function. It's
in the sense that
yeah.
it's not all like this could maybe be portrayed as the father that says you do this because I tell you to, because I am your father.
Yeah, it could be it, but it's not necessarily there. So there's a difference between the social father and the symbolic father.
Okay.
Symbolic father is essentially the no-sayer. The social father is literally the father. So Fisher also thinks that the issues of modernity cannot be solved by the nuclear family or any type of family structures. So he's not very, very pro, so if we have a father, because what he's implying in all of this is that we have a lack of dads in society, but we need not dads to fix it, we need a super nanny to fix it. So for me, it felt quite, ironic considering he spends half the book talking about the left shouldn't get into these small micropolitics, and then he does like the most micropolitics thing coded in the world. For me, on a certain level, it's like if we have even the symbolic father or the archetypal father or the social father who has served this role in society for millennia throughout history. Christianity describes God as the father. You have innumerable amounts of the father being the structuring thing. For him to say like no, we don't need the father, and he's not very, very clear about this, for me it's kind of like it's kind of like that micropolitics coded stuff.
If you put it into like very crude terms, it's like today when someone's acting like really ratchet or weird, you say that, oh, this is fatherless behavior.
Yeah.
And like the natural response to that is, oh, this person lacked a father figure in their life.
Yeah.
And then someone comes up to you and says, actually, what they don't need like a healthy male role model. What they need is a super nanny who micromanages everything for them, who has like Schrodinger's leash, which like at once reins you in and doesn't at the same time.
So in the Lacanian context, it's like, before the child comes into the world, it's in the mother's womb. It has this dyadic relationship with the mother of pure undifferentiated demand, in the sense that he's in the womb, it's warm, it's nice, it's cozy, he's getting all the nourishment he needs. It's only when he comes out of the womb and he's in the world that the symbolic father denotes, saying the structuring of desire starts. This is like when you're disciplining a child, this is when you're norm setting, you're teaching the child like what the culture is, this is the goals and these are the don'ts. So this is the kind of role that the symbolic Lacanian father does. Okay.
Yeah.
So Lacan kind of like charts the symbolic decline of the father in modernity, as in like, the symbolic role of the father was played by God, the state, the party, the vanguard left, whatever. And because they've kind of declined, you have this kind of unstructured, like, everything goes depressive hedonia state that Fisher is describing. And Fisher kind of wants to get back to some sort of paternal superstructure in society, but he does not want to do it with a father. And I'm not entirely sure why he doesn't want to do it with a father, to be honest with you.
So what's the harm in this? Someone comes and says to you, okay, man, maybe Marxist Supernanny is the way to go. And like, let's be very charitable for a second, right? Let's say the logic of the centralized economy, right? You've got this Soviet-style nerve center, which governs all economic and social functions and micro-tunes them to perfection, right? Why does that not fulfill the role that the previous kinds of fathers did? Where does it lack?
Can you repeat that?
As in, so
Very, very
the
briefly, yeah.
Marxist Supernanny in real life would look something like, a Soviet control center.
Yeah.
We're trying to
But he doesn't
macromanage
like that either.
everyone's life, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But then what does this Marxist Supernanny look like? What is the organized form as an organized principle, and why does it not fulfill the functions that the previous fathers did?
So, man, here's the thing. He draws on two guys to kind of explain why we can't have the father anymore, and that's Spinoza and that's Zizek. Getting into Zizek first. Zizek says that there has been Zizek has a Lacanian reading where he says that, there has been a decline in the symbolic father, and then there's a Zizekian reading of Spinoza as well. Spinoza basically talks about adequate ideas and inadequate ideas. Adequate ideas refer to those ideas that you determine for yourself through your own rational understanding of the world. You set your own paths. These are like rationally founded ideas, essentially. Inadequate ideas are basically ideas or things you pursue out of passion, out of reactivity, out of a lack of consciousness. And he says these are not good ideas. Okay, roughly speaking, this is
So
kind of
my understanding
Yeah.
of all of this was that the Supernanny
yeah.
does functionally fulfill a lot of the roles that were previously carried out by the father,
Yeah.
in the sense that it is also an organizing or leading principle in society.
Yeah.
The difference now is where he uses that line and says that there's a difference between someone telling you not to smoke
Yeah.
because it's bad for you and you should listen to me, and because and convincing you that you shouldn't do it because there is a tangible harm to you doing this, right? And reasoning with you.
Kind
right?
of, kind of roughly,
It's
yeah.
this is this a separation where the father, you're supposed to listen to him for the sake of by virtue of him being the father, as opposed to the Marxist Supernanny, where when he goes on to say you're in a Rousseau style, you're formulating a new general will,
Yeah.
right? A new collective principle through which people will carry out their will or organize society in whatever anarcho-communist bullshit way. I don't know what the
Yeah, so
exact
yeah,
underpinnings
yeah.
are. So that in that way, the Supernanny does fulfill a lot of the functions, but it is in nature fundamentally different from the father.
Yeah. So basically, the implication of the father is that the father just commands, and the father, through fear of punishment, enforces his will. So the Marxist Supernanny doesn't do this. The Marxist Supernanny is going to try to explain its
And justify
subjects
itself.
and justify itself, like, I am disciplining you for your own good. And he gives the example of himself as a teacher, where he's like, I don't want to I'm not being harsh on you kids because I'm a harsh motherfucker. I'm doing it for your own good because
Yeah.
it's only by me challenging you can I,
And those goals
Yeah.
that in a Fischerian Marxist Supernanny state
Yeah.
would be then, it's kind of vague, even on the K-Punk blogs it's kind of vague,
Yeah.
would be then formulated as the new general will, formulated as the new agency of the collective being exercised, as in there would be an interactivity between, or let's say a symbiotic relationship between the whole that structures itself as a representation of the people and everyday people,
Yeah.
right? Because even if you take South American Marxism or any of these latter day iterations, there's a big emphasis on participation.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that Fisher does well.
Yeah.
Let's leave aside what I think about how meaningful his ultimate end is,
Yeah.
but that, let's say, more horizontal approach, more diffuse authority, as opposed to this very vertical Aristotelian, I am the state, I am the paternal father, and I will tell you how you should live.
Yeah.
So that becomes a distinction in my
he's
mind.
advocating for more horizontality rather than verticality. Now, Zizek's role in this comes in that Zizek's ascribes, and we didn't discuss this earlier. Basically, Fisher describes that capitalists has a superego that commands one to consume more and eat more and enrich themselves more. Zizek says that due to the decline of the symbolic father, the no-saying ability, there's no prohibition on desire anymore.
Supercharged the
And it's
superego.
supercharged, So that's kind of where they're coming from, in the sense that we need paternalism without the father, because Fisher's conclusion is that according to Lacan and according to Zizek, there can be no more father because the role, the functions of the father are no more, it's not necessary. And we don't even want it back because we don't want a tyrannical figure at the top that is keeping us in line out of fear of punishment. We need a Marxist supernanny who can discipline us for our own good and explain to us things rationally. Now, why? I mean, I'm even having a bit of trouble getting to this because there's a lot of different levels of this. Okay, so Fisher doesn't get very, very clear about. Are you talking about the social father, or are you talking about the symbolic father, or are you talking about the archetypal father? Archetypical father, you know. This is quite important because all of these are very, very fundamentally different things. You know, there are times where he says that, you know, the patriarchal family is no longer valid. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, why? You know, a lot of the issues you're talking about, it seems conceivable that a patriarchal or, you know, just a normal family structure could address some of these things to teach our kids something. You know, this is social technology we've had since the dawn of mankind. You know, for you to say that it's no longer necessary and it can't deal with the challenges of modernity anymore, well, what about the fact that modernity kind of nuked this in the first
Bro,
place?
should I Mehdi Hassan you right now?
Yeah?
Should I Mehdi Hassan you?
Yeah, sure.
Bro, did you know
Uh,
Fisher dedicated many of his books to his wife and his children? What does that say about him as a person, bro? Someone who subscribed to the nuclear family himself. But no, this comes
but
back
in
to
the
our.
sense that, you can subscribe to nuclear family. He describes it more
Yeah,
as
no,
a
I was joking, but
yeah,
yeah.
he describes it more as a patriarchal family in which
Yeah.
the father is like the, you know, the lawgiver, the quote unquote Saturn figure of the family who structures everything accordingly. So he says that, you know, we don't want to go back to this, but like. It's very, very ironic because you're saying that if you look at times of modernity when the nuclear family was at its best, the patriarchal family was at its best, let's say in the 1950s, you had very, very much this model of patriarchal family structure, and you are yearning for that past. What is something that is remarkably different in the present West and the past West? It is that difference of the patriarchal family structure, right? So somewhere I feel like you're contradicting yourself, and then I feel like Zizek's entire thing where it's like the decline of the symbolic father. Zizek is a smart guy. He knows his. I think it's kind of stupid for him to say something like this, you know, simply because of the enormously profound role that the father has an archetypal figure. Like let's go into Jung. You know, the father as like an archetypal figure has been there in human society since the very, very start. You know, Odin, the father of all the gods for the Norses, Saturn for the Romans, you know, Zeus for the Greeks, whatever, etc., etc. The yeah, the psychological archetype of the father is not something that has gone into decline, or it's not a foregone conclusion that this is gone forever. Millennia of history kind of suggests that this is going to kind of channel itself in new ways. So for me, it felt kind of like it was very, very shaky grounds to say that, you know, the father is gone. The symbolic, the patriarchal, the archetypal, the father is gone.
What I
Like, it didn't make
find
sense to me.
interesting is, see, all these guys, because they ultimately come from the leftist academy,
Yeah.
in all throughout K-punk, right? You will see discussions. On the one hand, he's having all this higher order thinking, right? But the fundamentals of the 20th century left, where he's talking about workers' organizations or ex-phobia, you know, and a lot of what are now perceived as like institutional liberal causes,
Yeah.
all of those things remain core concerns, even for people like this. For Zizek, for Fisher, they couch them in more radical terms. But what I like about Land and what I think sets him apart from all of them is that these guys take it really far,
Yeah.
right? But in the end, they still come back to a lot of these ideas.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you know, there's nothing novel in Fisher saying nuclear family bad.
Yeah.
Marx said nuclear family bad. Lots of Marx adjacent people said nuclear family bad, and people have been saying it since. What would have been radical on the Fisher end would have been to say that no, nuclear family good.
Yeah.
And let me use this as a militating force against the superstructure.
Yeah.
But
let me try to reform or renovate this millennia old archetype social role for modernity's requirements, but your solution kind of is that no, we don't want to go back to it because we have some sort of phobia towards the past, and because even though we're anti-transcendent, anti-higher order, we elevate Marxist personal ideas to that status.
When you go super deep, like when you're serious, when you're seriously into theory and you've used historical stalwarts to build up your case over time, your worldviews are genuinely grounded in some deep scholarship. And that tends to hold these guys back. Whereas in Land, as in Negristani, right? With Negristani, he starts Encyclopedia taking the Lovecraftian, Landian view that we're not at the center of the universe, right? And then when he grows up a little bit, he takes this to, human beings are set apart by the faculty of reason. This is something that no inanimate or animate object in the rest of the universe has. And inadvertently, in my opinion, he effectively centers the human being at the center of the universe again. As this creative force. Right? At times I'm like, bro, this is almost like this is like neo-ijtihad. Like there are things that Reza Negristani and Iqbal actually might agree on.
Probably.
And you see every single time these solutions are presented. And they're just a return to the old, but they formulate them in different ways. And this is why, again, I think Land is the most radically honest of all of them. That statement, that famous statement, which I've said one too many times, that all logic is theology, it always ends up coming back to bite these guys in the ass. Because if you say that reason is an ordering principle, you assume some sort of order. If you assume some sort of order, you're assuming a logical build of the universe, therefore
you're assuming something transcendental.
Exactly. Right? And everything at the end of it keeps coming back to that. And these guys, they're almost like, as much as I admire Fisher's critique, genuinely from the bottom of my heart.
Is great,
right? There is a part in which they're just like petulant children. In which, your parents come and tell you something. Like, that meme which is like, when I was a kid, my parents used to tell me, less time on the phone, more time outside. And like, no, I'm not going to do it. And then 10 years later, when you grow up, you're like, Andrew Huberman told me to touch grass. And Nietzsche said you should never trust an idea that occurred to you indoors. And that vitamin D actually helps you live a better life. So I'm going to do all of these things.
But see, now Fisher would say that, no, that is all valid. It's valid that you took it from Huberman and Nietzsche and you did your intellectual effort, as opposed to that, because this constitute Spinoza's adequate ideas, where you have gone through a sense of self-realization to come to the conclusion that maybe the traditional way of doing things was always the right way. But because we don't want the father who's enforcing these tyrannical systems, we cannot have it anymore.
In a literal interpretation of what I said, I agree with you. But where I'm coming at it from is the psychological attitude. As in, when your parents were telling you, you're like, I'm a rebellious kid. I'm like a angsty emo teenager, so I'm not going to listen to them. Even though they probably had good, valid reasons at that time as well. Right? But now, really often, I'm not listening to it because I've got, like, bro, if you ask the average Huberman bro, he won't be able to tell you the science, nor does he understand it. Right? But because it came from a source that was not his parents, he was rebelling against, he accepts it. So that's the state of mind I'm talking about. Right? Which it was
and that's
mirrors.
fine. And I think that, there's something nice about, coming to those conclusions yourself. Like, you shouldn't just, it's kind of like the high IQ, low IQ bell curve.
But my argument's a bit different.
It's nice to come to it yourself, but...
my argument's a bit different. My argument's a bit different. I'm arguing they're actually not coming to it themselves. I'm actually arguing they're not coming into it.
At least there is a sense of, at least if you're going to ground this in Fisher's thing or Spinoza's thing, at least there's a grounding that, there's a sense of adequate. I don't think it's a valid reasoning. I think, we shouldn't be looking towards, hey, let's just rebel against our parents for no reason. I think, we should try to understand why our parents are coming from that. And maybe there is some truth to the idea of that, the parents or the patriarchal family structure should explain it to the children better, the way he describes in a Supernanny type fashion. I can accept this
I'm
stuff,
kind of arguing this outside the Spinozan adequate ideas. Like, again, what you're saying in the literal sense applies perfectly. The way I'm coming at it is take it in religious terms, for example, right? In religious terms, you have a paternalism from God himself or the divine order. Right?
Or the book or whatever.
Or the book, right? And that gives you ordering principles. Right? And the archetype of rebellion, which is Satan, right? He, like a petulant child, rebels against God and decides not to listen to him because of like this personal level of beef.
Yeah.
and this insecurity and this hubris,
Yeah.
right? Which is something that rebellious children also have. I've been through this phase, which
Yeah.
I'm not listening to my parents simply because I'm not listening to my parents.
Yeah.
10 years later, I'm taking it from the big other or the capitalist machine of the time,
Yeah.
right? I don't actually know how vitamin D benefits me,
Yeah.
to be really honest, right?
Yeah.
I
just have a
actually-
placebo feeling that when my levels are higher, I feel better.
And and the core of it being that I don't actually understand the new reasoning.
Yeah.
I'm doing it because to some level this doesn't apply to everyone.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are now accepting the same thing because it was couched to them in non-parental, non-divine language. Like
Yeah.
that is a parallel I'm trying to make, basically.
No, that I totally
So the
understand.
psychological attitude.
Yeah. But like I said, Fisher would see this as a good thing. Fisher would see this as the exact mechanism through which paternalism without the father can, let's raise ourselves by giving us our own knowledge and developing our own adequate ideas about things. So he would be in favor of this. And this is why this is actually, thank you so much for like adding all this stuff. It helps me also collect my thoughts. This is kind of what I feel like he's coming at the Marxist Supernannies with. Let us raise ourselves and become these enlightened beings, and through our own enlightenment, and if everyone around us is also enlightened like us and we have our own adequate ideas, we can, create this Marxist Supernanny state where, we have collective obligation, we have, a cross-generational mechanism to give our children values and all of this stuff. So this, like, Fisher would see this as a good thing. I don't necessarily see it as a negative thing. My issues come down more to like the fact that, or specifically the paternalism, the father, all of this stuff is like the Jungian shit. It's like when you say like, the father is gone, the father is dead, the father is like obsolete in modernity anymore. It's like that's just not true. That's just not possible, at least from a Jungian reading. Like if you suppress the father and the father has been delegitimized, you haven't killed the father. You've just empowered the obscene father, the shadow aspect of the father. And this is how you get all of this, strongmanship, Trump, the Andrew Tate, all of this entire space where you have these neo-father figures on the internet or in pop culture that young boys and young men literally look up to as their fathers and look to for divine guidance. Yeah.
I would relate this very heavily and almost explicitly to Nietzsche's argued death of God.
Yeah.
Because over there's a destruction of the ordering principle of the universe.
Yeah.
Right? And in response to that, we're still behaving dogmatically.
Yeah.
Everyone still acts out religion in their daily life, acts out ritualism in their daily life.
Yeah.
Except now you've hung on to maybe it's communism, maybe it's New Age atheism or whatever.
It's
right?
like you haven't really killed God, you've replaced him with something much inferior. And that's kind of what I feel he's coming at with the Marxist Supernanny. Once again, it comes down to, if you need no sayers in society, why not use the exact social technology that has guaranteed it to us for millennia of existence? Why don't we renovate it for modern requirements? But because they have this entire, like, far left, post-structuralist left issue with gender roles, and it's kind of like, it's seeping underneath the bubble. They want this, gender plural terminology, Marxist Supernanny, and even though they don't ascribe to transcendence, Marx is like almost transcendent for them. It's like, it's kind of shit, in my opinion.
Bro, in response to the death of paternalism by the state, in response to the death of the Nietzschean death of God, which flattens the organizing principle of the universe, I'm going to do my favorite thing and bring in the Islamic idea of fitra. Okay? And in specifically Abyssinian terms. Right? One of the things Ibn Sina argues in his metaphysics is that every created thing vibrates and is oriented towards its own perfection, is oriented towards the one, which is the unnameable God, and the way that, say, even a rock achieves union with that one is by becoming the best version of a rock, for example. Or a human being becoming the best version of a human being, a bird becoming the best version of a bird. Right? And he couches it in terms of love. And that the way that the vibrations, and this is like, like in proto-New Age almost, the way an ordering principle towards the divine is organized is that, knowing it or not, you're always attuned towards the one. And I use that argument to say that all of these people, whether they're in New Age atheism or whether they're in communism or anything that's godless, are still ultimately, in a fitra-induced way, oriented towards the organizing principle of the universe. And to put it in Quranic terms, they've got a blackened heart.
Yeah.
They haven't lost their capacity to do so. They haven't lost the innate magnetism towards the one. They're doing it, but with a corrupt lens.
Yeah.
Which is why you're constantly acting out ritual, you're constantly finding meanings. And I think the penultimate manifestation of this, the ultimate manifestation, is these organizing principles that people like land give us. Runaway capital. Oh, it's acting on its own, is it? Okay. Or like Fisher suggesting a Marxist Supernanny. Oh, like this will fix everything and mimic religion perfectly. Will it?
Yeah.
Right? So it's attuned towards still towards the idea that there is some organizing principle, there is some truth. They'll say, no, the truth is found iteratively.
Yeah.
Right? But again, that's where I bring back the land thing and say, you're still assuming a hierarchy of values, of goodness, of badness. You're thinking beyond the pleasure and pain principle.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what I keep coming back to.
Yeah. And this moves to the second point where it's like, you've already kind of gone into it so far. You have basically secularized religion.
Go deeper on this. I've touched upon it, but you have a lot of thoughts on this, so take your time.
So Fisher basically, despite denying transcendence or higher divine moral order, all book, he kind of wants to make a system in which we, there's a collective moral agency that humans come towards. There is standards that we set. There should be some type of cross-generational value mechanism that we can give to the next generation. We need to have some sort of collective obligation to each other. We need to kind of have some sort of framework in place that kind of breaks the depressive hedonia of capitalism, in the sense that if times are tough, we need to be obligated to something. We need to be obligated towards our own, what we owe to each other and what we owe to ourselves. But that's kind of literally the social technology of religion. And you just secularize it into like very, very like Marxist words or whatever. So for me, this is also like, my question with somebody like Fisher is that why not just use that exact thing or try to work with the exact principles that have been used for millennia of history? Because you railing all book about the fact that, atomization by capitalism equals bad. And this is not the same type of atomization, but you're still trying to atomize human beings from, a lot of history, a lot of traditions, a lot of cultural practices. So it's a different type of atomization. So my question then comes to like, okay, why not? I mean, you're basically describing transcendent structures. You're describing a proto-religion. Why not just go the entire way? Why not just use a hierarchy of values? Why not just say that, what will push somebody to be obligated to a difficult reality if not for a transcendent higher truth? What mechanism do you have? Adequate ideas? Like,
even the general will thing, and this is where like I kind of posit my solution, not necessarily to Fisher's world, but what does to quote Iqbal, what does the principle of movement in Islam / the world, what should it look like going into the future, right?
Yeah.
If he's saying, collective agency and reformulation of the general will, right? To that, I would respond that you got half of it right, which is a radical non-commitment to the human security system. And even Negrestani talks about this. He says that in the human faculty of reason, it allows for radical detachment from your immediate biological compulsions. In Fisher's world, from immediate dopamine hits, for example. So they've got that part right. What they don't have right, in my opinion, is a set of eternal principles which they can interpret and move forward with the way, say, Iqbal suggests in his system of ijtihad. Right? So they don't. Yes, you need eternal innovation and renovation, but you also need some fixture, some frame of reference.
Some type of stable truths.
Exactly.
Some reference points.
Some axioms, some eternal truths.
And that's the thing.
Right?
So, there's an automatic implication of transcendence or higher moral order or higher divinity when you say that there's some stable truth.
But they're in denial of it.
And they deny that as well. And okay, no problem, sure, we can do it in a secular way.
Yeah.
Maybe we can do it through a vanguard party or some sort of Marxist manifesto. No, he denies this as well. He doesn't really want any type of, because once again, this comes back to tyrannical paternalism of the system that we can't re-perpetrate in our ideal utopian future. So he doesn't give us any social technology that we can use, be it religion, be it a party, be it God, be it some sort of manifesto or constitution that we can fall back on when times are tough, that we can pledge allegiance to, as say that we pledge allegiance to these truths that we will hold ourselves to. So it's kind of an oxymoron. He's kind of contradicting himself over here.
To steel man his case and to be as charitable as possible,
Yeah.
I will add here that in capitalist realism itself,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like his agenda is to paint out that full truth. And so the argument stands valid, but where I would defend Fisher is in saying that the primary thrust of his work, and I think he does this really well, and which is why I like him, and this is the diagnosis part as opposed to the prescriptive part, is that you're goading people, you're forcing people to begin imagining what alternatives look like in a literal way.
Yeah.
I felt that reading the book, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can see that argument. If you've denied any higher ordering principle to be set in something, a relic of the past, as these guys would like to say, be it father, be it religion, be it God, be it a transcendentary figure, be it a communist manifesto or whatever, you kind of force people to imagine something new. But I don't think newness for the sake of it really has much value.
Yeah.
I think what has more value is that these are some eternal truths that kind of work.
Yeah.
How can we apply them to the modern age? And this becomes my issue with even this last chapter. I would say it's his most philosophically dense. He's bringing in Lacan, he's bringing in Zizek, he's bringing in Spinoza, he's bringing in all of these guys. But it still is kind of convoluted.
No, I agree.
It's very, very
I agree.
convoluted. I don't understand what he wants. I mean, I understand what he wants, but it's kind of a bastardized, or at least it's a contradiction of what he spent entire book talking about. So yeah.
As in you were saying earlier, for example, he's talking about like focusing on non-issues, and he comes in the micromanaging and the micropolitics.
Yeah.
And the reason I keep harping on Iqbal here is that on the one hand, he's got the radical non-commitment to tradition and the human security system, and in the same breath, someone like Iqbal has a radical commitment to those eternal truths.
Yeah.
Right? And now, I know what the low IQ response to this is going to be. It's going to be like, who decides what the truth is? Right? The answer is very simple. The answer is that the process of ta'wil or interpretation is something that is is infused throughout early Islam and throughout all mystical and innovative traditions that you see within the world of Islam, right? And all of them attempt to chart a new course, or a current course rather. It's not newness for the sake of newness.
Yeah.
While adhering to those unbroken eternal principles.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of the way forward. And the most hardcore literalists will tell you that, ta'wil is not a thing. Hidden meanings are not really a thing. And I'm very egalitarian on this. I do believe that the brunt of religion should be accessible and manifest, right? But in very little ways. Like, for example, places where it says to turn to the east and see the face of God. That obviously doesn't literally mean the face. It's not an anthropomorphic human face, right? It is the face as it befits him in a way that is unknowable to us.
Yeah.
Right? So even in rejecting the process of ta'wil, every interpreter, every innovator, every ijtihadi acknowledges the reality of ta'wil indirectly.
The implication
and just to round this off. In this day and age, in my opinion, the way forward and the only verifiable rhythm as contrasting the general will or collective agency applying reason or whatever in Fisher's world is that you have a continuous dialogue with reality on the basis of those divine principles. And that uncertainty you feel, that lack of bolting down of ideas forever that you feel, is a symptom of your faith as opposed to a glitch in your faith. In your faith. And just to round it off, um, there is, and this is more on the Islamic side. I don't really see a parallel of this in Fisher's thing, but I think that's kind of the problem. Is that numinosity in Jungian terms is real. Like this feeling that you have that there is something greater, that there's something transcendental, is a very real feeling, but it can't be your organizing principle, right? You do lean towards the divine, you do lean towards the numinous, but you do exercise reason beforehand and then lean into the numinous, as in reason first, emotion second. And I think that is kind of where I look to as a path out of like, if someone told me that this is how society is organized right now and you need a collective philosophy on how to move forward, that is kind of, in Iqbalian terms, how I would approach it.
But see, even you got into like some of the history of how we have ijtihad and like the history of renovation in our religious tradition, right? But that still comes out of individual figures. When we leave it to higher authority, that why do you interpret it this way? Because the really, really learned men said that this is the right way of interpreting, right? The Fisher's thing doesn't even really allow this entirely because of that Spinozan adequate, inadequate idea stuff, where it's like, unless you have gotten to it yourself with your own reasonable self-deterministic aspect, right? It's not valid, it's an inadequate idea. And here's the thing. The postmodernists, the Foucaults and the Derridas and all of these guys of the world did prove one thing. It is that reason deconstructed to its first principle shows that there's no grounding thing in it whatsoever. When Foucault says that he who decides truth is he who is in power, he is not untrue.
Yeah.
When Derrida says that, the first principle of logic is also, like, you can't get to a first principle, that's also true. That's fair. So then when it's like we're coming at it, when someone like Fisher's coming at it, we're like, through our own reason, our collective reason, how are we enforcing this? It's going to have to be through a representative, right? Or it's going to have to be through a god, right? It's going to have to be through some proxy that is a reflection of that collective social or moral truth, right? But he doesn't really give you much leeway for anything to work with. We can't have strongman figure. We can't have a vanguard left. We can't have a god. We can't have a transcendental father figure. We can't have, all of these different figures that fulfill this exact role that he's describing that a Supernanny does. And so for me, right, honestly, despite how deep he gets into it, it's kind of incoherent. That at least as far as capitalist realism and Marxist Supernanny goes, his solution is kind of convoluted. Who describes adequate ideas? We do. Okay, sure. Now we need to organize it in a collective moral life system, right? We need representatives for that, right? No, we can't have representatives. No, we can't have a constitution. No, we can't have a vanguard party. No, we can't have a god. No, we can't have a neo-religion. So how do we do it? My question is, how do we do it? And Fisher doesn't answer this question well enough. He just doesn't.
A lot of the things, because we're talking about it now in terms of Nick Land, who just makes an appearance everywhere, is that infamous tweet, the AI maximalists and the theology maximalists are aligning in some universe. And it keeps bringing me back to secular and divine readings of what Fisher is saying. And I find a lot of consonance in between in Fisher's critique and an Islamic critique of structural problems, especially economic ones, political and economic ones. I think what sets the Islamic structural critiques of inequality and power relations apart from the leftist Fisherian Landian critiques is that it offers you a viable springboard and a proper deen organizing principle from which you can escape the nihilism of or the meaninglessness of the solutions proposed to you by these guys. One example, when Fisher says that the collective fiction of late-stage capitalism, which we are unable to look past, it's like this permanent VR goggles in our eyes, right? And that you literally cannot imagine another future. And then he talks about performative activism. He talks about it metabolizing everything. Every time there's any kind of dissent, it gets eaten up and restructured into the whole. The Islamic idea, which is there throughout our theology, and I can explicitly quote, which says that, your rulers will be a reflection of you. I'm paraphrasing, but your rulers will be of you and be a reflection of you. This is not simply like this flimsy personal case which says that, yes, obviously there are 10 million people and your rulers will be one of those people. It's a structural critique which says that the reflexive impotence of the mass, which refuses to seriously engage in any kind of activism or protest, the leaders that you pick are those who you are willing to collectively tolerate.
Yeah.
So they are a structural result of your reflexive impotence. That's where I feel like the critiques really align. And then to deepen the critique of capital in particular, right? There's the idea, which is again throughout, like Sahi throughout our theology, which is that every ummah, every people has its own fitna, and the fitna for this people is mal, as in wealth, right? You also, at the same time, in our religion, have the idea that God has encouraged tijarat or business and forbidden usury or interest, right? When you bring these two things together, this is a critique of structural inequality, in my opinion, because it's saying that wealth generation of the real economy is a great thing. All of our major religious figures at some point have been traders or businessmen, there's a lot of that. But the hoarding of wealth and the idea that it can never be done away with, which the Landian critique of runaway capitalism gives you, and even Fisher absorbs into his idea of being unable to imagine alternatives, I think this again enters a structural critique. Where am I going with all of this? Simply the idea that these are problems that have been diagnosed before. Religion will give it to you in a way that maybe sounds more dogmatic, but once you extrapolate, it's not hyper-specific enough to box you in, and it's principled enough for you to really understand the issue, and then it also gives you a fleshed out idea of how you get past all those things. And I genuinely think that there's only so far you can go with reason.
Yeah.
Right? If tomorrow the collective agency decides that, which it has, that GDP maxing is the way to go, right? And it ignores higher order truths that a religion would prescribe to you, you end up in the late capitalist hellscape that you have today.
Yeah. See, here's the thing. Even when it comes to reason, right, which these guys tend to be big fans of, like, let's reason our way to the truth, right? There's no reasonable backing as to why, reason commands there to be human dignity, or reason commands there to be, equality amongst people. Reasonably thinking, I don't see why that's the conclusion, these are articles of faith more than anything.
Yeah,
I believe in
absolutely.
the equality of man.
Absolutely.
I believe in the emancipation of man. So these are also articles of faith that these guys really try to secularize a way that through reason we can come to these conclusions. But I don't know, not very, very convincing.
It's like naak idhar se pakarna hai, idhar se pakarna.
Yeah.
That's kind of
This
kind of what they keep coming back to.
and here's the thing, I think that this is a consistent issue with a lot of these a lot of the critiques of modernity that come out of the West today, be it someone like Mark Fisher, who's on the far left of the spectrum, or someone like Curtis Yarvin, who's like on the far right of the spectrum, right? Their critiques of modernity are structurally quite similar. Like the Cathedral and Capitalist Realism kind of describing the same thing, in the sense that, they both hate bureaucracies. They both think that, the superstructure can absorb its own negation and sell it to you as a product, as a commodity, as, as whatever. They both believe that, Fisher and Yarvin, that, democracy, the Westphalian style of democracy, is essentially a scam. It's a sham for special interest groups. So they kind of describing the same thing, and both of them, when you read even Yarvin Magnum Opus, which is the open letter to an open-minded progressive, right? You can't help but feel like there's a yearning for something higher in his work. The same way when you read Fisher, There's a yearning, there's an underlying latent yearning for, things can be different, things should be different. There's a yearning for a divinity. There's a yearning for, a new way of looking at things.
Bro, which
Most of
is
them-
why I would say that even like, say, land infatuation with Kabbalah,
Yeah.
right? He's still like, the numogram is still defined in relative terms to
A religious tradition.
to a religious tradition, right?
religious
It
mystical
mimics the
tradition.
tree of life and presents what is an imperfect version of the tree of life.
Yeah.
And in Negristani's progression, personally,
Yeah.
I think I may have said this before, but he goes from Cyclonopedia's logic, which is very Lovecraftian, where human beings are pawns in the geological showdown between the earth and the sun.
Yeah.
And then his later evolution is all human beings are centered again. Human beings are agents of reason. Human beings in their particular context can reach what is right.
Yeah.
And he tries to make like this like Kantian level of like, this is how, I haven't got that deep into it, but this is how we're going to decide what's right and what's wrong. And it then again comes down to the idea of right and wrong,
Yeah.
and the idea that human beings were created or exist or matter,
Yeah.
which is always going to be a religious idea.
I feel like all of these guys, like, they have this phobia. They all have this phobia against religion. It's like, to be seen as academically serious intellectuals in the Western tradition. It's like, you can't say, you can't profess belief in any type of higher ordering principles, and you need to have a secularized solution of how we do it, be it the Marxist Supernanny, or be it the soft corp, or be it all of these really, really convoluted solutions that some of these, honestly, and they're both excellent thinkers, be it Yarvin or Fisher, they're both excellent thinkers, but it just comes down to that, they complain about the foreclosure of the imagination, but they don't ever ask to, they never ask the question if the closure of the religious mind has something to do with that foreclosure of the imagination.
Bro, you know what I find really interesting
Yeah.
is, you know what a lot of the response to this is going to be?
Yeah.
There's going to be major technicalities and arguments people are going to give us and say that, no, actually, it is this particular mechanism in Fisher's reformulation of the general will that nulls the need for organizing principles, that nulls the assumption that things are good and bad. And you will have all these pedantic, very academic little escape hatches,
Yeah.
which never really go anywhere.
They
And
never
people
go
will say,
anywhere, and they
you've
never
misread
answer
it.
questions,
Bro,
yeah.
people will say you've misread it.
Yeah.
Remember the way when, for example, when I say that I think that the Frantz Fanons and the Foucaults of the world come from a position of weakness, it's not because I've misread them. It is because my fundamental worldview views them as punching up because they're living out the meme, which is endeavoring to live as an inversion of it, thus forever living out
In its shadow, as a contradiction,
in its shadow
as
in
like
relation to it.
Yeah.
As in, long story short, being that whenever you try to leave something behind, which is, say, for example, white supremacy,
Yeah.
you or the European liberal world order or colonialism, you're constantly defining yourself in relation to it, and you're going back towards indigeneity, as opposed to, say, the vitalist Iqbalian approach, which says that take the good, leave the bad, have universalist principles that don't have you automatically punching up, saying that this person is the oppressor. Ontologically, you don't have to be the victim.
Yeah.
Yes, and this is like, it's embarrassing that you have to explain this to people.
Yeah.
When people say that you're not acknowledging the fact that someone's a victim, this is intellectual dishonesty,
Yeah.
in my opinion. Because obviously we know on a physical, in the physical realm, we were victims of colonialism for several hundred years. In a literal physical sense, we were lower than the British. But in an ontological sense, in a Muslim metaphysical sense, you should never feel yourself as lesser than
Yeah.
the master, right?
Yeah.
Or never feel him to be the master in the first place. That's what the argument is, right?
Yeah.
This is not a misreading. So the same way, when we say that these guys are continually, like Ibn Sina's perfect rock or rose, tending towards God like a tuning fork, or like a magnet that always shifts. That those birds which have like this electromagnetic like ball in their minds, which like tells them where to migrate.
Yeah.
That's what, even with the Manala on like Eon, we were likening the fitra to. And this is what it is. This is a blackened fitra on
Yeah.
the parts of the post-colonial, post-modernist, post-structuralist thinkers. because they're again trying to reach that same structuralism,
Yeah.
that same
They're
discipline.
trying to get to the same telos of a lot of these primordial truths, but because they're anti-teleological and because they're anti-metaphysical and because they're anti-transcendental, I don't even want to say anti-religion. I want to
Yeah.
use their own terminology. Is that they have to make these roundabout, extremely secular, convoluted ways of getting to those same ideas. Like even Deleuze's plane of immanence. You know, like I don't know if you've read Plane of Immanence. Some of the central ideas. It's like how everything is actually connected to everything, and you know all ideas are actually real, but they're not just they're virtual, but they're not real yet. And it's like, what are we doing here? You know, like why don't we just use the exact symbolic terminology that has kind of done this for humans and our imaginations forever? You know what I mean? So yeah, man, it's rough out there. Great
Even like
critiques,
little
yeah.
things, like for example,
Yeah.
and you know, I love Zizek, and I've grown up watching Zizek. I've seen him live, you know, like great guy in a lot of ways. But you know, when he says things like, I forget what the academic terminology he uses for this is, but he says that you basically retroactively your life is retroactively imbued with meaning.
Yeah.
As in, when you fall in love with a woman, you look back and you say, I knew it the moment I met her. I knew there was something different the moment I saw her. As opposed to, if you hadn't fallen in love and, say, married someone, right?
Yeah.
The meaning retroactively imbued to that process would have been, I knew the moment I met her that she was the one that was going to get away. I knew there was something wrong, right? So you really, what is central to the human story, or how does the human story come into being? It is a narrative structure that you tell yourself in your mind.
Yeah.
Like literally to the point that you only ever know your own reality, right? How you perceive the world is the only thing that ultimately matters to you, and that is, you order that in a narrative sense. So she's like saying that all of that is done retroactively. And even that to me sounds so deeply religious, because you know what this just sounds like? This sounds like, you know, when something goes wrong in your life and some elder comes and tells you, you know,
Exactly what you feel like you need to hear, and in that moment it clicks with you. Like that.
no, like someone comes and says to you, you know, yes, you prayed for this, but you didn't know whether it was good for you at the time or not. But now that you look back at it, you know that it was good for you.
Yeah.
And that actually everything fell into place because there is a law mahfuz, there is a divine order, things are written for you, God listens to your prayers, and at the end of the day, everything falls into place, everything makes sense, right? There's like, it sounds so much like that, where I'm like, dude, you're metaphysically doing almost the same thing. You just can't come to grips with the fact that there might be a higher intelligence doing all of it.
Well, for the most part, a lot of them are anti-metaphysics. Man.
Yeah.
For the most part, a lot of them think that it's only flesh and blood, it's only skin, and we're all meat sacks, and there's some sort of chemical balances that make all of this go woo woo. And then they want to say, there has to be a meaning. What the? What meaning is there to meat sacks?
And genuinely, like I always wonder, and I'm never going to take a serious take on this because who are we to know what's inside someone's heart? But what is it that drives such brilliant minds to reach the wrong conclusion about the most basic things?
I think it's the Enlightenment. I think the West, literally because of all of their PTSD they had, because of papal corruption and stuff, and the Protestant Revolution, they said that, we're never going to go back to this. We need to separate church and state. They just have a phobia against it. There's something structural in their history and in their books.
That's at a mass level, right?
And that's why they're doing all of these things, because they can't go back to the exact same thing that they have such PTSD from.
So that is the structural argument.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to point towards is, and this is ultimately a religious belief of mine.
Yeah.
But I think that everyone gets a crack at it, right?
Yeah.
Everyone gets the chance to believe or not believe and make that decision for themselves, right? What is it? This is almost like the ultimate, the idea that all of these 160 IQ guys make the wrong call on the thing that matters the most, in my opinion, is maybe the ultimate proof of human equality, fundamental equality, as in the Baba on the side of the road who was like selling miswaks in Karachi or something, has actually made the right call where it matters, as opposed to a generational mind like Leotard.
I actually don't see it like that.
How do you see
I don't see it like that. I see it as that the 160 IQ is ontologically, intellectually a superior specimen, but because they have been brought up in a tradition and a culture that is underpinned by a religion that couldn't keep itself fragmented, they're kind of destined to this stuff. And that's why it's kind of a affirmation of my faith and my religion being the right one, because they didn't go through that fragmentation where I don't have to be a 160 IQ person kind of coping by making my own random terminology to describe the exact same thing that I tend to have PTSD from. I'm espousing values of human equality and emancipation and freedom as if it's a rational thing, yet there's nothing rational about it. Those are articles of faith, and you want to secularize that away. That I don't think that is proof of, in my opinion, proof of human equality. That is proof of some tradition might actually having been superior and structurally superior and kind
So
of
I
proof for
don't
it,
think
that's
that-
how I kind of see it.
So
as.
your conclusion, at least, I don't think precludes what I'm saying. I don't
Yeah.
think these things are necessarily in tension.
Yeah.
Because 100%, and this is something that
I mean,
on
I
a
don't think,
discourse
at
level,
least on a temporal level, I don't think there is human equality. Maybe in the eyes of God.
that's what I'm talking
Or
about.
maybe in the
That's
eyes
what
of
I'm
God,
talking
I can
about.
see what you're
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about. But there's no such thing
No,
as a
no,
temporal
of course,
equality
of
between a
course.
160 IQ and an 80 IQ.
No, that's I'm using the temporal inequality to say that the ultimate meaning, because it comes from an ontological, religious, faith-based thing. Obviously, this is, again, I'm reiterating, this is a religious argument. Right?
Yeah.
Because it comes from that, the temporal inequality becomes proof of what actually matters. As in, if someone who is that advanced can make the wrong ultimate call, but the average Joe can make the right ultimate call, in my eyes, there's a level playing field. Level playing field is maybe too literal, but there's a fair crack provided to everybody. It varies culture to culture, as in, for example, not to get too deep into it, but ultimately I'll leave it at this. My belief regarding all of this is that obviously you'll never be like sent to the hellfire if the message didn't even reach you. Right?
Yeah.
You weren't ever exposed to the right thing.
Yeah.
Right? So I do believe that. And that factors into this argument and complicates it quite a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that the ultimate metric always kind of boils down to how much you deviate from your baseline. As in, and this is something I see like in Pakistan a lot as well. Even though I would consider myself on, if ultimately someone told me to choose, I would consider myself on the religious side of things in Pakistan, right? But what really annoys me about a lot of religious people in Pakistan is not realizing that everyone did not have the same upbringing you had, right? When you judge someone, for example, when you judge someone who's like grown up around things that are religiously frowned upon, whether it's not praying or it's some kind of substance abuse or whatever, any kind of degeneracy, when you're arrogant about it, the statement you're making is that if I got the same upbringing as that guy, I would have done better, which is a really bold and arrogant claim to make. And in the ultimate divine calculus, I do believe there will be some kind of accounting for the fact that everyone did not get an equal opportunity to access.
It's like, when they weigh exams, weighted exams.
Exactly. No, the curve, literally, there's going to be a divine curve alongside which people are going to be like weighed. And so all of Pakistan was not raised the same way. We don't have like this blanket hyper religiosity the way you do in like in Afghanistan or in Saudi, where everybody was raised in a very particular way. Pakistan is not that country. So to judge from that yardstick gets like, it's like if you want to push people away from the divine in like one fell swoop, go be like an arrogant prick about this. So early Reza Negrestani has to be some of the weirdest, most interesting content to come out of like the CCRU lineage.
Yeah.
Cyclonopedia, the
Yeah.
text that I really went into, is a theory fiction text
Yeah.
in which he's trying to make a point and telling it through a narration of the Tellurian rebellion against the sun.
And the cross of Akht.
And the cross of Akht.
Yeah.
God. And the Tellurian rebellion against the sun is the Earth's rebellion against the sun. What does this mean?
What does this mean?
So these are two, there's a sentience implied to both, and there is a definite sentience applied to the Middle East, and I'll come to that. the idea
What's
is
the background of these guys? First of all, like people are going to be like, we've gone into some wild
yeah.
What the are we talking about? What is the intellectual lineage that
Let
Negrestani
me.
is kind of falling into?
So
Like,
actually, I think
you
I can.
mentioned Lovecraft. Like,
Yeah.
what is this a syncretization of?
So H.P. Lovecraft for me is one of my genuine like Borges, Roald Dahl level teachers in absentia. Someone who I've read since I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, and whose importance to the current meta I did not realize um, until very recently, until I read Negrestani and learned more about Lands Outside and his obsession with Lovecraft. What is the major innovation Lovecraft makes in his work?
Yeah.
At some point in his career, Lovecraft's horrifying, terrifying, otherworldly beings stop being supernatural in the ghostly sense. They stop being some kind of dark reflection of the divine. They're not demons, right?
Yeah.
They're the old ones.
Yeah.
They're actual alien or earthly beings that exist in the physical realm just the way we do, right? Call of Cthulhu was like incredibly famous. So like, so these old
It's
ones,
this genre called cosmic horror.
yeah. So the idea there, it'll acknowledge things like multidimensionality or like there being these incredibly powerful old beings, but they're all part of the same fabric of like 3D space time that we understand and adhere to, right? And this kind of was expounded on by Freud. So Freud has this essay which expounds upon what makes something weird, what makes something eerie, what makes something scary, right? And one of the ideas there is the unfamiliar embedded within the familiar, right?
Uncanny Valley.
Yeah, just so the uncanniness of a natural being that is so disruptive and powerful and evil, as opposed to like a god ordained devil like evil, can actually be a lot more unnerving. Because think about it this way, say in the divine story of good and bad, right, there is the balance of God and the devil, right? And you believe that one day the God will win. But in the old ones, you've got these really terrifying, unexplainable creatures. Like imagine like the
Is it like
Leviathan.
which you look at Cthulhu and you like go insane or something?
Yeah, there's it's rife with like think about it this way. The way I come to this, imagine if the Leviathan was not a biblical creation, but the Leviathan was an actual old one, and it found its way into biblical myth because of the fact that it existed.
Yeah.
So knowing that no God existed, to thinking that no God existed to create the old one, and to act then as a counterweight to this terrifying larger cosmic horror evil force is actually pretty scary, because then there's no balance, there's no redemption, right? So what does this do? What metaphysical shift did this entire background bring into world literature and ultimately then philosophy? Is that decentered mankind. It said, no ashraful makhlukat, you're not the best of creation.
Anthropocentrism.
No anthropocentrism. The world operates on principles and actors way larger than you. Human beings are one single part of their story.
You're simply a node.
Exactly. Land says this when he says that human beings are a vessel through which the outside force of capital operates. And the Reagans and the Thatchers think they're controlling capital, but capital is actually controlling them. And then Negrestani takes this and turns this into this cosmic geological metaphor where he talks about Earth's insurgency against the sun. What is the idea here? It's quite amusing, actually. He says that the sun has imposed its royal will, its regal will upon the earth, and all geological functions, all earthly functions, whether it's the growing of trees, the sustenance of humankind, all of these things depend on the sun.
This is
So the
the
sun,
order of the sun.
yes,
This is the empire of the sun.
is the empire of the sun. It dictates everything that is happening on the Earth's surface. Then he throws in a confounding factor. That confounding factor is oil, right? This is where he talks about petropolitics. Why is oil a confounding factor in this entire empire of the sun? Because
It's degraded matter.
it's the underground hidden injection of earth of the sun's creation, and it's hidden underneath the earth, and it enables rebellion. How does it enable rebellion? It's hidden away. The sun no longer has a say about it, and when you extract oil at breakneck speeds and you burn millions of years of oil in a short time span, it throws off the geological and natural ecological processes that the sun engenders upon the earth. So when the sun,
This is practical terms like the hole in the ozone layer.
exactly,
Global warming, all of these things. Oil enables that, and oil is the Earth's way of rebelling against
Exactly.
the order it has imposed upon
and
it.
the peak of this
Yeah.
is the eventuality where the hot gases on Earth and the emissions on Earth become so unbearable and intense that the Earth explodes into a ball of flames. And that is the moment in which it has freed itself from the dominion of the sun.
Okay.
Right? Now, why does any of this matter?
Yeah.
You're like, what the what is the story for? The exact same thing that I was saying with Lovecraft. What he's trying to tell you is that human beings are a node, a vessel, a slight, a groove in time which allows for this forwarding of petroconspiracy against the sun,
Yeah.
right? And that the geological processes, just the way that oil or plants decomposing turn into oil, or that there are tectonic shifts on Earth, or any of these things, humans are simply another supplement to those geological processes, and their ultimate function is to advance towards that state of rebellion against the sun.
It's like transcendental nihilism.
Yes,
And then humans
yes.
don't matter on a deeper metaphysical level.
And then he tries to subsume religion
Yeah.
into it. Now, what does he say? This is where it gets really interesting. He says that on the face of things, the two forces, the two major, he talks about the Middle East. He grounds all of this in the Middle East because it has the most oil reserves.
And it's also the center of the world.
It is this historically the center of the world. All religions, major world religions of today, or most major world religions, have come out of the Middle East. And he says that the fact that petropolitics, by virtue of oil reserves in the Middle East, and the fact that radical monotheism, by virtue of the major world religions of today being found in the Middle East,
Is radical monotheism part of the Earth's rebellion, or is it part of
It is.
Empire Sun?
It is.
Okay.
It's part of the Earth's rebellion, and he's basically making the case that capitalism is a flattening horizontal force. Capitalism wants to lay itself out, increase connectivity. It wants to establish trade routes. It wants to establish fiber optic cables. It wants
to connect everything
in a flattening way.
Everything. Yeah.
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 And then he says,
The plane of imminence.
And then the vertical force is that of radical monotheism. Radical monotheism drills into the earth, right? It also helps drill into the earth in terms of extracting oil, yes, which is also a capitalist function. But it is a counterweight, seemingly, to the forces of capital. How? Take, for example, the Iraq War. Take any war that has been fought in the Middle East over the last 30 years, where you've had radical monotheism on one side, right, which is like the Islamists, jihadis, etc. And you've got the forces of world capitalism, which is like the Exxon-backed US government, on the other. And Negrestani says that on the face of it, it looks like these guys are in intense competition with each other and that one of them is going to win. He says, no, this assumes a divine order. This assumes a religious eschatology. That is not the case. Both of them are egging each other on, and they're going in the direction of the Earth's rebellion against the sun, because the ultimate consequence of both is that, yes, there's a momentary instability when a war occurs, but then it re-territorializes and the extraction of oil becomes even faster, right? He likens it, he says this, I'm actually going to read this to you. He talks about, I'm going to read to you exactly what he says. Oil, a pseudo-conspiracist which underdevelops societies and economic systems through petropolitics to tear them apart slowly. Another quote, I call petroleum the devil's excrement, Juan Pablo Perez Alfonso. Okay? And then this is my favorite bit. Okay, he's describing the United States' relationship with oil, uh, instrumentalizing both capital and the verticality of religion. And he says, Infernatron, or simply the US pyrodemonism, with tentacles spreading through both thematic theism, the cleansing tide of the cathartic fire, and the mass engineering process of incomplete burning associated with Zippo jobs in the Vietnam War and the napalm obsession of the US war machine. Now, what he's trying to tell you is that on the one hand, you've got like the WASP enabled single issue dedication to the Middle East, which is like we're fighting an eschatological war, which is why we're so closely aligned with certain states and so against others in the Middle East, right? And at the same time, you've got the engines of capital, which are the actual
ExxonMobil.
Huh?
Which are ExxonMobil.
ExxonMobil is metaphysically true, but I think over here he's getting more towards like say your anti-communism, you're expanding capital, but also in the war you're like funding the military-industrial complex, and then it all links back to oil as well. But worldly considerations of strategy and domination, which is like the logic of capital, which is the horizontal plane, and then the vertical logic of
which is the
WASP
evangelical
logic. The evangelical logic.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what he's kind of getting at here. So it's some crazy stuff. He keeps bringing radical monotheism back into it and says that, these jihadis, they look like they're, offsetting what capitalist goals are. But as they help expand inadvertently the fire in the place, it takes you closer to an eschatological point where the world actually erupts into something that is going to end it, or that is going to increase the speed at which we either extract oil or go towards some kind of
Nuclear
implosion
war.
or explosion.
Yeah, nuclear war.
So that's kind of it. Some crazy stuff, interesting stuff.
Yeah.
I'm only about like 80, 90 pages into Cyclonopedia, and hopefully another time we can go a bit more detailed into it.
Yeah. Then we can explain what the cross of Acht is.
That's never happening. I can't.
You guys been wilding.
Yeah.